The story of MInidoka relocation camp. Pearl Harbor got bombed in 1941, and just 2 months after, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 because everyone thought that Japanese Americans were spies. Japanese Americans got held in relocation camps across the U.S. between August 10, 1942 to October 28, 1945. In 1943, Japanese Americans enlisted or got drafted in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team and fought for the U.S. even when they were held in internment camps, and helped America win the war earlier than expected and changed the way Americans treat Japanese now. The Japanese first immigrated to the U.S. in around 1886 when Japanese were allowed to leave Japan. More than 400,000 men and women left Japan to come to the U.S. The Japanese came to America because of the free lands. Japanese immigrants experienced a very different way of life when they came.
There are moments that you forget that we are racially different. And there was a time where Tony's parent had a stall at the public market, and we would go there after some activities, and then there was one day Tony and Vito and another fellow, it was hot, they said, hey, let's go swimming, and the pool is right up here, the crystal pool, and we looked at it, it cost a dime. So I said, hey, that's a great idea. So here we go. It's only a couple of blocks from the market, so we went there, and they paid, and I was in line, and when it came to me, they said no. They did say, they just waved their hand and said, out. And it just caught me by surprise. And the others, they were shocked. They didn't know, they couldn't understand it. I understood right away what it was about. And they start arguing with them, with the clerk there, or the cashier. And at the same time, I was already halfway down the block.
They mostly farmed or became shopkeepers in America. After many years, the Japanese were discriminated from Americans because the Japanese looked different. For example, the Japanese were called Yellow Peril. Americans created the Alien Land Law in 1913, and it affected Japanese, Chinese, South Asians, Koreans, and many other groups. This was called the Alien Land Law because first-generation Asians were considered aliens. This was a law where Asians were not able to purchase land. There was also the National Origins Act of 1924, or known as the Johnson-Reed Act. Calvin Coolidge was the 30th president at the time, and he signed the act. This act affected Asian and European immigration. For Asians, only 2% of the population from every country could immigrate to the U.S. because Americans wanted to limit the number of immigrants. For Europeans, this act would control immigration. Japanese and American relationships were getting worse. Because Japan did not have much oil, the U.S. would export oil to Japan. Japan was attacking China with the oil from America. Because China was America's ally, in 1939, the Americans said to the Japanese that they would not sell materials to Japan that could be used for war. In around 1940, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt banned to export metal and oil to Japan. The Americans were expecting an attack by the Japanese but did not know where or when. Isoroku Yamamoto was a Japanese naval officer, and he planned the Pearl Harbor attack. Finally, on December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, and more than 2,300 Americans got killed. The Americans got furious and they declared war on Japan. The Americans were fearful that the Japanese and the U.S. would side with the Japanese. They were also worried that the Japanese Americans would be spies for Japan. 2 months after Pearl Harbor was bombed, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 on February 19, 1942. This order said that any person of Japanese would be taken to 10 relocation camps in the U.S. They were Topaz, Poston, Gila River, Grenada, Heart Mountain, Jerome, Manzanar, MInidoka, Rower, and Tule Lake. The Japanese Americans were taken to the camps on a train. They were only allowed to bring a bag for each person. The American government split families up because they were considered potential enemy aliens. The Japanese Americans lost their homes, businesses, and money. MInidoka opened on August 10, 1942. Most people at MInidoka were from Alaska, Washington, and Oregon. MInidoka was in Jerome County near Twin Falls in Idaho. MInidoka was a 33,000-acre camp. It had 36 residential blocks and had 12 barracks on each block. The barracks had no conditioning. MInidoka had schools, shops, fire stations, a 600-bed hospital, a library, and many other places. Japanese Americans at MInidoka would work as doctors, nurses, mechanics, dentists, and so on. MInidoka had communal showers and toilets. It also had very harsh conditions. In summer, it went up to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. In winter, it went down to negative 21 degrees Fahrenheit. Spring had ankle-deep mud and had blinding dust storms. In 1943, about 26,000 young Japanese Americans volunteered or got drafted in the U.S. Army. Nearly 1,000 people volunteered for MInidoka. MInidoka had the longest casualty list of all the camps, which was 73 people. Most of the Japanese Americans were in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. During World War II, law-abiding Japanese American citizens were herded into remote internment camps, losing their jobs, businesses, and social standing, while an all-Japanese American division fought heroically in Europe. Tom Brokaw. Some Japanese Americans were interpreters for World War II. World War II ended on September 2, 1945. After a few days, on October 28, 1945, MInidoka closed. The Japanese Americans got a $25 ticket to anywhere in the U.S. Many of them started a new life somewhere else. Finally, getting out of the camps was a great day. It felt so good to get out of the gates and just know that you were going home. Finally. Home wasn't where I left it, though. Getting back, I was just shocked to see what had happened. Our home being bought by a different family, different decorations in the windows. It was our house, but it wasn't anymore. It hurt not being able to return home, but moving into a new home helped me, I believe. I think it helped me to bury the past a little, to, move on from what had happened. Aya Nakamura. The Japanese Americans had trouble again when they were released from the camps. Most of them had no money or home, so they had to start their lives all over again. There were many disagreements on whether Japanese should return to Japan. Even after the Japanese left the internment camps, the Americans thought the Japanese were spies. An American Army major writes of his Japanese son, "Whenever he goes along the street, he is pointed at by adults and children who indicate that he is probably a spy."
People who were there think the sense of isolation was probably the most dramatic sense that people have of the place, and that can still be captured. So if you know something about the fact that you had almost 10,000 people, well, ultimately 13,000 people who were there, and how many of them saw that as one of the most dramatic impacts on their lives. And there are still places on the site that you can stand and see pretty much what those who were there in 1942 to 45 could see, and try to imagine yourself in their position, not able to go home.
On January 17, 2001, MInidoka National Historic Site was designated as the 385th unit of the National Park System by Bill Clinton. In 1988, Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act. It was to every Japanese American interned in the camp. It was a formal apology and $20,000 in compensation. Barack Obama gave the brave Nisei who fought in World War II the Gold Congressional Medal on October 5, 2010. MInidoka has changed the outcome of World War II with the Japanese Americans who fought for America. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team was the largest and most decorated unit in World War II because of its size and length of service. Since around 1886, when the Japanese first came to America, they have had trouble. Pearl Harbor got bombed, and most Americans think that Japanese are spies for Japan. So President Franklin D. Roosevelt signs an executive order, and the Japanese have to go to 10 relocation camps in the U.S. After a few decades, the Americans gave a formal apology, and now Japan and the U.S. are allies and good friends.